that should work. Yeah, perfect. So just great. I think we are now recording, which is great. So welcome everyone to the IAM New England branch meeting on equity and inclusion in asset management with our presenter, Emily Ticht, and from the Portland Bureau of Transportation. So today's agenda is a couple of presentation with Emily at 12:05, where she's going to be sharing with us what they're doing in terms of investment and tracking metrics to see for progress. And then we'll do a quick Q&A session, and then we'll be closing it out. So an introduction to your speaker today. Emily is the asset management of Portland Bureau of Transportation, with a 20-year career in infrastructure that is focused on bringing to the forefront the long-term considerations associated with public investment, impacts in communities, health and well-being, and environmental and economic outcomes. Through her work in the US and abroad, Emily has led the introduction of policies, processes, and tools to embed these considerations into decision-making and redefine project success. So without further ado, Emily, it's all over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I trust you can all hear me okay. I'll be sharing my slide deck. I first just want to extend my thanks for the invitation to share our experience here in Portland. We are committed to transportation justice, but we're still learning. We have a lot of progress to make, a long way to go. And so we're really keen on engaging in these sorts of conversations and learning from our peers. So you should see a slide before you. Please speak up if you don't. I wanted to provide a little bit of context to our situation here in Portland, Oregon. We are the widest large city in the US. We have quite a history when it comes to equity, and that includes racial equity, also inclusion of low-income folks, and as well as persons with disabilities. Here on the left side, you'll see kind of the lowlights, I might call them, where African Americans were banned from the state in the 19th century, including free African Americans from entering the state. There's a number of land use decisions and policies that are listed here below that really have impacts that we still see today around property ownership and accumulation of wealth in terms of how people are able to exist here, both in the state of Oregon and particularly in Portland. ADA information, the Americans with Disabilities Act impacts or as it pertains to Portland and Oregon are listed here. Of course, the federal passage of ADA in 1990 with several updates in the early 2010s. But most relevant for our context is just a settlement agreement after a civil action was threatened by CREEK, which is a Civil Rights Education and Enforcement Center, in about 2017 that resulted in a settlement agreement between the city of Portland and CREEK to deliver 18,000 ADA compliant curb ramps over 12 years. So this is just some of the context that we're working with here in Pacific Northwest. I just wanted to offer a metaphor I borrowed from Isabel Wilkerson, who's the author of Caste, as well as some other great works. We here in Portland and Oregon are like homeowners who've inherited a house on a beautiful piece of land whose soil is unstable rock with deep cracks and ruptures. And though none of us were here when the house was built and we didn't directly erect the uneven pillars or joists, as the current occupants, it's ours to deal with now. So with that, I want to talk through some of PBOT's initiatives to be an anti-racist organization leading with equity and pursuing inclusion for our BIPOC residents, low-income community members, and differently abled persons. So let's start with our commitment to transportation justice. That's a term we use to refer to equity, including climate justice in our transportation system in Portland. Our strategic plan that we adopted in 2019 indicates our commitment to transportation justice, as that our streets belong to everyone and that all Portlanders deserve the same access to safe, reliable, and affordable transportation options. In everything that we do, in all of our decisions and investments that we make, we ask ourselves this question: will it advance equity and address structural racism? So let's look at Portland today. Just to provide you some context, if you haven't had the chance to visit us yet, you should. This is what the city of Portland looks like. The boundaries were divided by the Willamette River, and to the north here is the Columbia River. In addition to these physical boundaries and divides, in addition to these physical barriers, transportation infrastructure itself can create some physical barriers or connections in some cases. I just want to draw your attention to I-205, which is in a way its own boundary line. Areas east of I-205 were annexed to the city relatively later than the rest of the city. And then in the news, a fair amount these days is the Interstate 5, the I-5 corridor up through North Portland, where decades ago this was the hub of Black Portland before the state constructed the interstate, dividing that community. Discussions now, if you read the news, is about expanding that highway and the potential impacts to communities in that location. So I also wanted to indicate our current demographic makeup. This is our equity matrix, which focuses on density of persons of color and low-income communities. I spoke a moment ago about I-205 and also 82nd Avenue. So to the east, you'll see a greater concentration of our BIPOC communities and low-income communities, as well as in North Portland and a bit downtown. So this is relevant as we get into a discussion of what we've observed in terms of how our assets are invested in and performing in the city, and as also when it comes to improving our investments going forward. So just a couple other context setting slides. We in recent years have started to collect data to be a little bit more forthcoming just in terms of what we observe in terms of how our infrastructure performs in the city. This is our sidewalk presence and absence representation. The equity matrix, the BIPOC community and low income concentrations are now here in the darker shades of gray. And then you can see in these green, orange, and red pies how sidewalks are present in the city or not present. Where green indicates that sidewalks occur on both sides of the street. Orange is there's a partial sidewalk, perhaps it's only on one side of the street, and red indicates that there's no sidewalk. There's a sidewalk missing or a sidewalk gap. And so you can see kind of a similar relationship between sidewalk presence, absence, and equity. Though I will point out here in Southwest, we just have terrific topography that makes it challenging also to construct sidewalks. Similarly, we did the same for street lighting presence. Street lighting on both sides of the street is with these well-lit yellow circles. Unfortunately, many of our communities in the outer East Portland, as we refer to it often, has street lighting only on one side of the street. And that is due in part because recent annexations of land has meant that we haven't always had the resources to bring them up to the service level of the rest of the city. So what this means in practice to us, there is a relationship you might infer between the availability and the function of assets and the outcomes to people. So these deaths that are illustrated here in this rather somber graphic aren't necessarily linked to asset failure, but it is worth noting that there's a failure in planning, design, or provision of asset features that support safe mobility in our system. Again, you can see in this representation, concentration of traffic deaths in East Portland, which may be due to facilities that are present or absent from the system here. So what are we doing in our asset management office for inclusion? I mentioned that while transportation infrastructure can create barriers and conditions for harm, physical, financial, and social, when done right, transportation can also enhance access and connection. So Portland proposes to do this by commitments through policy, investment, engagement, and supporting robust transparency that includes clear information and access to data, decisions, and decision makers. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples in each of these categories here in the next few slides. So beginning with policy, I'm pleased to share that the Bureau of Transportation adopted just a few months ago our asset management policy, which has a firm and clear commitment to applying a transportation justice framework and equity lens in delivering reliable service for our underserved communities, especially BIPOC populations. It has reference to direct engagement and facilitating close communication with these communities. And of course, there's a tie-in to our strategic plan, our 5-year plan, which I discussed a moment ago, of which asset management is a core tier. It's part of the 3-legged stool. It is the most robust leg, in my opinion. The citywide asset management policy is actually in review currently by City Council. Hopefully, it will be adopted this summer. The citywide policy includes all of our infrastructure bureaus, all of our public utilities, including housing, parks, planning, and so on, and formalizes the equipment or the commitment rather to equitable outcomes and advancing the city's racial equity goals. It also speaks to intergenerational equity, which is just the commitment to not lay the burden of the cost of our day at the feet of future Portlanders. Closely linked to this is also the city's expectations related to our DMW ESB contracting goals and expectations, so how we deliver the maintenance and the reinvestment services by using our DMW ESB partners. So in the investment category, this is a specific example I'm excited about, and I want to immediately thank City of Oakland. Oakland Transportation was the inspiration, the direct inspiration for this approach. The City of Portland, being resource constrained for years and years, made a decision about a decade ago to reduce, nearly eliminate investment in local streets in favor of investing in pavement on our busier streets, which makes a lot of sense in terms of volume of traffic, a number of people served. But from an equity perspective, our local streets are really the first and last mile that the communities, the residences are experiencing as part of their day-to-day. Also, the equity matrix, the demographic data we use comes from the census and refers directly to where people live rather than where they work. So if we want to knowingly invest in areas that have higher concentrations of low-income populations or people of color, we would want to do it in areas where we know they live and are served. So with this model, and this is something that's currently in discussion at PBOT, though not yet adopted, is having a focused investment on local streets, as I say, for the first time in a number of years, using equity and proximity to schools as our guide. This model looks at the traffic analysis zones around the city and looks at the percentage of persons of color, percentage of low-income households, compared to the share of streets in poor condition, right? And so you can see, you can draw a number of conclusions around things like in Southeast TAZ, where you have a tremendous percentage of poor condition streets and a relatively higher percentage of BIPOC and low-income households. But we're really using this to inform how we would dedicate funds. So given a pot of money, based on this information, we might dedicate almost a full third of our local street maintenance investment in this TAZ in Southeast Portland, and a relatively smaller amount in Northwest Portland, which has both a smaller share of failed streets as well as smaller racial equity scores. Of course, we would continue our investment on busy streets and use the safety history to inform those investments. In the category of engagement, we are really keen on delivering on expectations, delivering the customer service levels that the public has. We have an infrastructure expectation survey that's out to many of the public in the city of Portland now. We're kind of rolling it out in phases. what I'm excited to share about this is we actually have a partnership with our transportation justice communities. It's our TJ partnership, where we pay these community groups to help us engage with these different neighborhoods, these different populations around the city, knowing that the government coming in and asking for something is maybe less of a motivator than a leader in your community asking for you to be engaged. So through a partnership, our TJ partnership, we're looking to solicit feedback from various communities around the city, BIPOC communities, differently abled communities, different parts of the city, on what their expectations of our infrastructure are and where we're failing to meet it. We have 13 asset classes that we manage here in PBOT. And so, a number of questions as to how we are delivering on those services in terms of accessible and clear sidewalks, multimodal bridges, so on and so forth. So that's part of the story. We also have a number of community advisory groups that represent a whole gamut of the city, including our budget advisory group that regularly reports directly to City Council on how well we're doing or not, and our Fixing Our Streets, our local gas tax oversight committee that also speaks to how well we're succeeding or not in delivering on our commitments for major maintenance and infrastructure. So part of the understanding that we get from the public on our infrastructure quality and service relies upon public engagement and direction, some of which we can't always get directly from the public, in terms of complaint-driven infrastructure repair in particular. So when we became, well, I don't know if it's more resource constrained. When we were impacted by the Great Recession in 2012, we moved several of our services to a complaint-driven response approach rather than proactive maintenance and repair. So I'm thinking about sidewalk postings, for example, as well as what you see on your screen here, traffic signal repair, which is both informed by regular inspections, maintenance visits, as well as public requests. What I wanted to share with you here is maybe in line with what you might expect. The number of public requests don't always align with the number of assets, and certainly as you get into a greater concentration of low-income or BIPOC communities, the higher equity score here at the right end of the screen, you get maybe fewer requests related as compared to the number of assets. So the number of signals here is represented in gray. The number of requests are these sort of teal bars. Not surprisingly, potentially we get more requests here in the lower equity score areas to facilities, less requests in the higher equity areas. And so consequently, what we observed about ourselves and are now taking action to remedy is the number of maintenance visits also were lower in the higher equity areas where we got fewer callouts than maybe the lower equity areas, the squeaky wheel factor perhaps, where we go out to respond to issues. And so as a result of this information and observation, we are intentionally being more proactive in our response and our regular maintenance and inspection activities, more engaged and more engaging, which means that we're really looking to open the lines of communication and encourage engagement from communities directly to our engineers, maintenance crews, and dispatch, so that we can respond to the needs in the field without waiting for someone to call us first. I also wanted to share this dashboard. This is another great product out of that team. This is a street lighting equity dashboard, and this is sort of another reflective look back at how well we're doing. In this dashboard, this is a ArcGIS Online map app. You can see again this now in shades of purple, the equity areas, and now in this screenshot we have just focusing on the highest equity score, 10 out of 10. What are the number of responses received, and how long did it take for us to respond to that request? So in this case, the average was about 25 days to respond to a streetlight call out and we have here just the various issues or complaints called in. But we observed 25 days to respond to an issue as compared to this screen with a lower equity score of 2. It took about 30 days on average to respond to those. So this is just another way, another dashboard or interface that keeps us honest or allows us to track some data as to how well we're responding or not to issues that are called in. So this last category, and I think many of these, as you may have picked up on, are really interconnected. Access, transparency, engagement are all closely connected, but I wanted to really highlight some of the things that we're doing with regard to giving the public access to our decisions, increasing transparency, and direct access to our decision makers. I mentioned, we have regular public advisory bodies. Portland is, I think, quite well known for how engaged our residents are and how much the city encourages public involvement. We have a very vocal community, and so we provide spaces for that level of engagement to respond to issues pertaining to our budget, pertaining specifically to investment programs, as well as modal teams. So this is our pedestrian advisory committee, one of the snapshots from that group, really focusing on our pedestrian infrastructure and how well we're serving that community. We have a number of dashboards. I think I mentioned here at the beginning the settlement agreement pertaining to ADA compliant ramps. This is a public-facing map that anyone can access in order to get a sense of ramps that do or do not comply with the current ADA standards. We are delivering 1,500 ramp improvements per year. And so the intention is that this map becomes fully blue. As part of that, actually even preceding the settlement agreement was a ramps by request program, which gave people, residents of Portland, the ability to request ramps in their community or on their route at any time. This program was started in the early 2000s, actually well before our settlement agreement, but we have a web-based form where anyone, person with disability or not, can request a ramp being installed along their route. And we respond to that within 90 days. And so this is just another one of the ways that PBOT is trying to be responsive to the needs of the community. Yeah, okay, so those are some highlights here. I know that I kind of breezed through a lot of information. I would welcome any questions and happy to provide you with more detail virtually or electronically later on as well.
Thank you, Emily. We do have a few questions in the chat. I'll just read them off. Given the delineation described between areas of prosperity, color, income, is there another graphic for the interesting bar chart that includes the downtown area? I'm also curious, since the figure was based on where people live and not where they work. Is there a relative increased prosperity or not where low-income areas of housing are located close to work centers?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So let's see if I can bring up the correct slide here. Are you referring to this bar chart?
Yeah, the question was for me, so that was the one. Yeah. So because earlier you'd had the kind of the highway delineation showing the various areas, but there was also a little cluster around downtown as well. So but I just wondered whether you had an equivalent set of bars for that downtown area and what that might show.
Yeah, so that's going to be our central TAZ here, with the lower income households represented, and it's a bit misleading. We had a similar sort of issue, reporting demographics in New York City, where you'd have Central Park, itself would have just the lowest income in the city because perhaps the data or the ACS information reports some folks living in that location. Downtown is starting to become more residential, but more higher income as folks move into downtown, at least pre-pandemic. And certainly the access to jobs encourages that sort of patronage or home ownership there. But we're also seeing just because of the commitments to infrastructure downtown that the condition of the streets, at least the pavement, is actually quite good, though it is really costly to replace. We don't have really good information in terms of the journey to work data or the employment centers in terms of how people are going from their residential, communities of whatever their equity score is to employment centers. But that's something I would want to explore some more.
Yeah, I was just curious if it's a way of trying to create some more equity by introducing income into like creating new businesses around poor areas or areas of color, just so that you can through the creation of jobs create more equity, and then focus on
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Has there been any sort of studies conducted where, after you've gone and sort of fixed the streets that are in poor condition, has there any sort of studies gone back to see if it's made a difference?
Yeah, and in fact, whenever we do make a major investment, a transportation investment or otherwise, other utility investments, our Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and I see Radcliffe is on here, maybe he can also comment, has us do a gentrification analysis and vulnerability study before the fact, when we're still in planning and project development, to ensure that the improvements we make won't have the adverse effect of actually driving out or pricing out some of the lower income populations that live there. By providing improved service, sometimes the whole community sees a lift in property value, or in some cases we would hope for that. But where it lifts value or cost to the point where it's driving out the existing populations, it presents a real problem. And that's certainly been seen in several parts of the city. The I-5 corridor I called out here at the very beginning, which this area, which used to be Black Portland, that had the I-5 go through it, and a number of investments also made by the city, is now one of the most expensive parts of the city to live in. And in fact, a lot of the African-American residents that had been here for generations have been forced out. And so in some ways, we're tracking the good and the bad that comes out of our investment, and also trying to be proactive or considering those impacts beforehand in order to moderate the financial burden on the residents.
A couple more questions. How is PBOT making data more accessible to outside organizations to conduct additional analysis?
So we have a fairly robust open data policy that was adopted just about 2.5 years ago. And I don't recall the web address off the top of my head, but I can send it to you. It's something like Open Data Portland. And so we have a terrific amount of data on, of course, the demographic information, but also land use, transportation and planning decisions, and data layers, shape files that can be used or processed by agencies within the Pacific Northwest, as well as anywhere in the country. We have a fair number of requesters from universities or academics around the U.S., particularly around transit as well. And so we make that data freely available. We're also a part of Waze's Connected City Partnership, and we try to make information available and accessible through that partnership as well. We had been part of a Sidewalk Labs study. I don't believe we're part of that anymore, but the idea is to increase transparency and access to the data that informs our decision making. Also, if you do have ArcGIS online, You can search on that application any of PBOT's web maps or map apps. There's a terrific amount that are freely available, and you can explore that as well.
Awesome, thank you. And just to tie this sort of a little bit back to one of our previous webinars, which was on crash data and analytics, I'm curious to know if any of your upgrades to the infrastructures have led to, for example, an increase in collisions or injuries and incidents, because more people utilize the area, bringing more traffic there or more pedestrian there is increased probability of injury. So I'm just wondering if you guys monitor that, and if you have sort of a policy of only X amount of injuries, you know, for example.
Right. Well, so the city of Portland is a Vision Zero city, acknowledging that any serious injury or fatality is unacceptable. And we make a number of investments to try to mitigate those or minimize the likelihood of that occurrence. In recent years, even through the pandemic, in fact, we have had a number of serious injury or fatality events on our streets, unfortunately. When we do make investments that potentially increase the volume of flow, we also try to marry that with safety infrastructure investments in many cases, which is to say rapid flashing beacons or other infrastructure facilities to provide safe passage for non-motorized vehicles. As part of our Vision Zero framework, we prioritize pedestrians and vulnerable users at the top, at the first priority, bicyclists, and then on downward with motorized vehicles near the bottom. And so we really try to design our system and make decisions with the most vulnerable users in mind at the front end. The City of Portland is also working closely with the state in order to lower speed zones on the streets, and in some ways an increase in volume at a slower speed can really mitigate or hopefully mitigate some of the effects of increased motorized transportation.
Thank you. Another question: how has equity analysis impacted your risk analysis when conducting asset management strategy? Is it treated as a risk scenario, or is it something completely different?
Well, that question feels planted because we're in the midst of a risk management program. Right now, we have a consultant team that's come on board to help us develop our risk management framework and our risk register. And a lot of our decisions going forward, we intend to use a triple bottom line approach that considers the social impacts, including things like equity or unfair burdens placed on certain members of our community as part of that equation. So the triple bottom line approach, considering environmental impacts, social and financial, and that risk framework, really looking at who benefits and who pays as a result of the investment. That work is only just beginning. We hope by the end of October to have a more robust risk framework that takes into account the considerations in these various categories and organized by asset class.
Great. And what are some of your successful programs, and what have you learned that can be applied to other projects to make them more successful?
Well, we have in Portland a Get Portland Moving effort that I was reminded of actually just talking to Mark a moment ago, which is looking at or investing in enhancing coordination and communication with our utility partners. We work closely with both the public and the private utilities to coordinate around the work in the right-of-way in order to minimize impact to the traveling public, as well as minimize the impact to our assets. Our pavement in many cases looks like a zombie or Frankenstein, where we have these streets that are just cut and sliced and diced in all these different ways. And as a result of our, Get Portland Moving program, which was adopted, I believe, in 2017, we've actually been able to enjoy some benefits and avoided costs as a result of improved coordination between our utilities, as well as our transit provider. This is really important in outer East Portland or different parts of the city where motorized vehicles are really the only way to get around, and a detour in parts of the city would add significant delays or burdens on some community members that maybe don't have the ability to hop on a bike to avoid it or find alternative methods of getting where they need to go.
Great. And then I think this is the last question. With the current pandemic, or the last year's pandemic, however you want to call it, happening, a lot of agencies have taken advantage of the fact that they've had low usage or low demand upon their assets. How has Portland Bureau of Transportation used the pandemic to its advantage in terms of perhaps infrastructure renewal or implementing new programs through the lens of equity and inclusion?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We have been making use of the lower travel volumes by doing more of the road maintenance, including long line striping, sidewalk repair, crosswalk repair, so on and so forth on many of our busier streets, some of our major arterials, which has really had a lot of our streets looking great and ready for the hopefully this post-pandemic reality as people get back to it. So from a maintenance standpoint, that was really helpful. Despite the challenges, I mean, we're also faced by the pandemic challenges of our maintenance crews, only one person per vehicle, and the limitations of deploying our crews. Like other cities across the U.S., including many East Coast cities, we started to establish businesses in the right-of-way by providing what we call healthy businesses, slow streets, safe streets, other opportunities for people to use the right-of-way in different ways, which is to say expanding the patio or the outdoor seating for restaurants, by providing local access streets or limiting flow of motorized vehicles so that people could recreate more safely and more easily in the right-of-way. Having it be a bit safer for people to ride bikes or walk on select streets around the city. Both programs we're looking to extend into hopefully a post-pandemic reality, just as I've seen City of New York and other cities do as well. And also creating kind of related to both of those, these public plazas, these areas that aren't used by private business and that aren't necessarily throughways, that can be used for the public to congregate at safe distances and get together to connect safely with members of their community and neighbors. And doing that in parts of the city where we know that communities, potentially in our higher equity areas, would really benefit from having kind of a safe space, or maybe a something larger than a block party and smaller than a parade, right? For people to feel connected to one another. And we hope that those sort of programs can continue also while transportation service picks back up.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Welcome.
Hey, Sati, maybe one sort of last question. But I mean, I was actually fascinated by the streetlights and sidewalks as measures of kind of prosperity, because I mean, I guess anywhere in the Boston suburbs is reasonably nice place to live. And we only got a sidewalk on my street like a couple of years ago, and we've only got intermittent streetlights on one side. So it's always interesting to see how people used to measure things. But I was going to ask a question about sustainable development, because I'm working on the SSG for that right now with other folks. But so you mentioned the triple bottom line. I was just curious, with the kind of prosperity differences, what challenges that provides from a sustainable development perspective. But I think you actually answered the question before I had a chance to
great.
to ask it. So,
Better.
so I just wanted to put it out there just in case there was anything else. But it was great to see that's included, though, because it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah, I think so as well, and I'm very interested in what you're developing, Mark, and your SSG, and if it's useful at all, feel free to reach out or email. We can continue to correspond on the topic, because we have a pretty robust planning program here in Portland, and we want to be leaders in that space if we can be.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you. No one else has any further questions? I'll close this out. So you should see on your screen who is the USA chapter of the IAM. So the Institute of Asset Management is a global body. The United States currently has 8 member executive committees. We're fortunate to have one of those individuals on our New England branch team, which is Mark. We have 13 established branches, plus a few potential 3 actually standing up. And we have a very active Next Gen and Women in Asset Management group, approximately 500 members. There is actually, for any of those individuals who want to find out a little bit more about asset management, we actually do have an event coming up with the Women in Asset Management group to talk about asset management and what it is, coming up in the next few weeks. Please do check out the IAM.org and events to find out those events. And these events are typically free, and they're all over the country, so anyone can pick up an event or a meeting anytime they want. Just schedule it depending upon what time of the country you're in, and you should be able to attend for nothing, and you can meet some new people and learn some new things. I often do that myself. For those interested in more of a professional journey route into asset management, typically a lot of people will start with the asset management body of knowledge, which is actually being relaunched in 2021. From there, a lot of people typically take the introductory training and go on to the certificate qualification. It gives you a general basis of asset management. In terms of a lot of individuals go for that, we're usually starting their asset management programs in their organizations. Typically after that, for those people who really want to sort of get into the profession of asset management, a lot of people go into the diploma qualification, and then they typically register to be an asset management professional. And that gives you the AMP designation after your name. For individuals who want to go in further, there's also a fellowship opportunity with the Institute, where you can put some post-nominals after your name. We have several people who do that. A lot of people are in the US and the UK predominantly, but there's definitely some good individuals you can turn to, which is more importantly to network and ask questions, and to help your asset management journey, both professionally and personally. We are actually having a 2021 conference currently scheduled to be virtual and recorded, similar to last year. It came off very, very successfully. I attended myself last year, and the beauty of doing this virtually and recorded is that you can finally go to those events that are always scheduled at the same time as others. So this time you'll actually be able to attend multiple different events, which I always find an advantage because you always learn something new, and as typical, always the good ones are scheduled simultaneously, so you always miss those. But this is a great way that's doing it, and that's a positive thing. I think that's the outcome of this COVID. We have a call for volunteers, so we're actually looking to update our asset management body of knowledge and global projects as well as US projects. So we're looking for people to help support knowledge development and institute growth. Please contact the USA at the IAM.org. And for those individuals who want to get involved in the New England branch, we have a few events coming up. Next month, well, in August 18th, it will be Resiliency and Asset Management. From our successful resiliency series that we held at the beginning of this year, we're bringing it back for a roundtable discussion with some energy utilities. After that, we're looking to do one on climate change, and then following that, we're kind of opening up for suggestions from the member community or the individuals that attend this branch to sort of, what do you guys want to see or hear from? So we're looking for presenters in October for climate change, and December for an open opportunity. If you guys want to get in touch or want to find out more about the IAM or this particular branch, please do not hesitate to contact myself or Scott Morris. Our emails are on the screen. You can contact me at New England, as one word, New England at usa.theiam.org. Thank you very much for everybody who attended. If there are no more further questions, it was great to see you guys, and thank you, Emily, very much for this informative presentation. And I will end the recording. Thank you.